My name is Julia Stone, and I never thought the house I built for my mother would become the one place I no longer belonged. I showed up that evening expecting warmth. Instead, I saw laughter through the window and realized I wasn't part of it. When I asked the staff if my name was on the guest list, they paused. "I'm sorry, you're not on here." Confused, I turned to my mother. She didn't look surprised. "Did you really think this was for you? You weren't invited?" I nodded slowly. "Then I'll stop showing up where I'm not wanted." And I left. Before I take you deeper into this story, tell me, where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments, and if family betrayal is something you understand too well, like this video and subscribe. You're not alone. I didn't always feel like a stranger. There was a time not too long ago when I believed I was building something real, something that mattered. I poured 2 years of my life and most of my savings into that house by the lake. Every stone path, every wooden beam, every curve of the porch had a story. I chose the cedar siding because Mom once told me it reminded her of summers at her grandmother's place in Vermont. I built the swing under the oak tree because she said that's where she used to dream as a girl. That house wasn't just a gift. It was my offering. A way of saying, I see you, I love you, let me give you peace. I guess I didn't realize I was the only one who saw it that way. Growing up in Portland, I was always the quiet one. A little too serious, a little too focused. While my younger sister Lana was the life of every room, charming, spontaneous, effortlessly magnetic, I was the one with straight A's, scholarships, and long nights in front of a computer screen. By 29, I was a lead software engineer at a major tech company. I had a sleek apartment, a hybrid SUV, and a dog named Rusty who only liked jazz music. On paper, I was doing well. But family doesn't read resumes. At home, Lana's chaos was considered spark. Her failures were learning experiences. My achievements? Well, that's just Julia. She's always fine. I remember one Thanksgiving, Lana showed up an hour late with cranberry sauce from a can and everyone clapped. I had cooked 3 sides from scratch and brought a bottle of Pinot from Oregon's finest vineyard. No one said a word. It didn't hurt at first. I told myself they just didn't know how to express love the way I did, but over time the silence started to echo. So when Mom mentioned once, offhandedly, that she wished she could have a little place to retire by the lake, I took it as a chance. Not to impress, but to belong. Every free weekend, I drove 2 hours out to that plot of land near Mount Hood. I found a local builder. I worked late nights to pay the difference when budgets ran over, and when the keys were finally handed over to Mom, she cried. I thought, for a moment, I had done something that mattered. But that night, when I stood outside my own mother's party and realized I wasn't even worth a name on a guest list, everything shifted. It wasn't just about the house. It was about the years of being the reliable one, the invisible one, the one who always showed up, even when no one noticed. That night, I walked back to my car without a word. Rusty sat waiting in the back seat, tail wagging like the world hadn't just cracked open. I drove away, tears pooling but not falling, gripping the steering wheel like it was the only thing keeping me tethered to the earth. Funny thing is, no one called the next day, or the one after, and that was when I knew. My presence was never expected, just my contributions. But I wasn't ready to give up yet. There was still too much unsaid, too many lines that needed to be drawn. And that's when I made a decision. I was done waiting for them to see me. From now on, I would make damn sure they couldn't ignore me. Looking back, the signs were always there. Photos from family trips where I was either holding the camera or cropped out of frame. Birthday dinners where everyone raved about Lana's latest road trip, while my recent app launch, used by over 1 million people, barely got a polite nod. They didn't mean to exclude me. At least, that's what I used to tell myself. But exclusion doesn't always come in loud, cruel words. Sometimes it comes in the quiet act of forgetting someone's presence, or pretending their silence means they're okay. When we were kids, I used to think our family was fine. Not warm, but functional. We had a decent house in a good Portland neighborhood. My dad, Alan, was a practical man, quiet, methodical, someone who believed in routine. Mom, Diana, was softer in her tone but sharp underneath. You'd feel her judgments before you heard them. She had this way of smiling at you that made you question whether you were doing something wrong, even when you weren't. Lana came along 7 years after me. She was unexpected, according to Mom. A surprise, a second chance, maybe. And with her arrival, something in the dynamic shifted. Suddenly, there was color, drama, noise. Lana was adored, even when she broke things, even when she failed tests, even when she stormed out and didn't come home for days at a time. Me? I colored inside the lines. I was the peacekeeper, the planner, the daughter who packed her own lunch in 3rd grade and reminded Mom of her dentist appointments, and for a long time that felt like my role. Quiet, capable, unnecessary. But the thing about being the strong one is that people stop checking in. They assume you don't bruise. They assume your silence is proof of stability. And I lived in that silence for years, convincing myself it was enough. It wasn't. I remember one particular night, maybe 6 months before the house was finished. I had invited everyone to visit the site, Mom, Dad, Lana. I wanted them to see it while the walls were still being raised, to see the vision before it became real. No one came. Mom said her back hurt. Dad said it was too far. Lana? She didn't respond. I sat there on the porch steps, eating takeout under a half-finished roof, wondering what I was trying so hard to build. A house? A relationship? A sense of belonging? The deeper truth? I wasn't building for them. I was building for the idea of them. The version of family I hoped we could be, not the one we actually were. And in that gap, between who they were and who I wished they'd be, was where all the pain lived. But I ignored that, like I always did. I told myself it would be different once the house was done. Once, Mom sat by the lake with a glass of wine and saw the way the sunset hit the cedar wood. Then, maybe she'd understand how much I loved her. Maybe she'd say something that made all those quiet years worth it. She never did. And now, as I stared at the empty space in my apartment that used to hold the blueprint folder, the one I'd carried back and forth for months, I realized something. I had mistaken effort for connection, sacrifice for intimacy. I gave them a house. They gave me silence. But that was only the beginning, because silence, when held too long, has a sound of its own, and I was finally ready to listen. It happened on a Sunday night. I was curled up on my couch, a mug of chamomile tea in hand, trying to wind down after a long coding sprint. Rusty, my dog, was asleep at my feet, twitching in some dream I wished I could crawl into. The soft hum of the dishwasher filled the room. It should have been a peaceful evening. I wasn't looking for pain, but that's the thing about social media. It has a way of finding you. I opened Instagram, mostly out of habit, and there it was. A photo, then another, and another. My mother, my sister, our lake house, my lake house. Strings of fairy lights crisscrossed the porch beams. The swing I'd hung under the oak tree was covered in wildflowers. Someone had even placed candles along the stone path I laid with my own hands. It looked like something out of a lifestyle magazine. Perfect, celebratory, full of warmth. But something was missing. Me. I swiped through Lana's story, watching her swirl wine in a crystal glass, her laugh echoing off the walls I'd paid for. Mom stood beside her in a cream linen dress, smiling that camera-ready smile. There was a banner in the background. "Welcome home, Lana." My chest tightened. I kept scrolling. More guests, clinking glasses, speeches, laughter, fireworks over the lake. Not once, not a single frame was I mentioned. No one tagged me. No one even texted. I sat there frozen, staring at the screen like it might change. Like if I refreshed the app, the algorithm would magically drop in a picture of me, standing beside them, laughing too. But I wasn't part of the algorithm that night. I wasn't part of them. It wasn't the first time they celebrated without me. But it was the first time they celebrated inside the one thing I had given all of myself to create, and I wasn't even worth a phone call. At first, I told myself it must have been a mistake. Maybe someone forgot to invite me. Maybe they assumed I was busy with work. I was always busy. Maybe they meant to call and just forgot. But the photos kept coming. And the captions, "So happy to be home, best night ever, family first," they told the truth louder than any apology ever could. This wasn't an accident. It was a message. Loud, clear, cruel. I closed the app. My tea had gone cold. Rusty stirred but didn't lift his head. I sat in silence, hearing the echoes of a party I funded but wasn't welcome to attend. That was the part that stung the most. Not the party, not the photos, but the fact that no one, not my mother, not my sister, thought I deserved to know. They used my keys. They drank under my roof. They toasted to each other in a house I built, and they never even thought to include me. I should have been furious. But what I felt was smaller, sharper, invisible. And that kind of pain? It doesn't scream, it whispers, and it lingers. 2 days later, I drove out to the lake house. I didn't call ahead, I didn't text. I didn't even tell myself what I was hoping to find. Closure, maybe, evidence. Something real to replace the swirl of images I'd seen through a glass screen. The drive was quiet, the kind of quiet that gets under your skin. Even the trees along the highway looked indifferent. By the time I turned onto the gravel road, the late afternoon sun was dipping low, casting gold through the pines. That golden hour glow, what photographers chase. I used to think it made the house look magical. Now it just made everything look like a memory I wasn't allowed to keep. I parked in my usual spot and walked up the stone path. The same path I'd spent an entire weekend laying with a level, a bag of mortar, and blistered hands. There were still faint wine stains in the grout. Someone had spilled red. They hadn't even tried to clean it up properly. I stepped inside. The scent hit me first. Warm food, something garlicky mixed with perfume and wine. It still lingered in the air like the party had just ended. The dishes were stacked high in the sink, lipstick-stained glasses teetering on the edge, crumbs everywhere. A wilted bouquet sagged on the dining table. The throw pillows were stained and crooked. One had what looked like chocolate smudged across the corner. My breath caught when I saw the scratch along the hardwood floor, right near the fireplace. It was deep, ugly, like someone had dragged something heavy, probably a speaker or one of those oversized coolers Lana loved bringing to every gathering. I walked from room to room like a stranger in a museum of carelessness. No note, no, thanks for letting us use the house, not even a sticky note on the fridge. They'd all come and gone as if I didn't exist, as if the house didn't have an owner, or worse, as if it had one but she didn't matter. I sat down on the edge of the couch and stared out toward the lake. The water was still, reflecting the last sliver of sun like it was trying to hold onto the day a little longer. I used to imagine that someday this would be the spot we'd gather for holidays. Mom sipping tea by the window, Lana and I laughing over board games, maybe even her kids running through the yard, barefoot and loud. I held on to that image for so long, I forgot to notice it had never been real. This house was supposed to bring us together. Instead, it had become a stage for a celebration I wasn't invited to, and no one, not a single soul, thought I'd mind. I stood up slowly, wiped dust off my jeans. I should have been angry, but what I felt was colder than that. I felt done. Done pretending this family saw me. Done making excuses for people who never asked how I was doing. Done waiting for a place at a table I built with my own hands. I locked the front door behind me, got in my car, and drove away without looking back. If they could treat this place like it didn't belong to anyone, then maybe it was time I started treating it like it belonged to me. I used to think silence meant peace. Growing up, silence was rewarded. It meant you weren't causing trouble. It meant you were being easy, the good daughter, the one who didn't demand too much, didn't cry too loud, didn't interrupt during dinner. Lana could storm out of the house over a curfew and somehow still end up with hugs and understanding. I could get a perfect score on my physics exam and be met with, "Of course you did." So I stopped sharing. I stopped expecting. And somewhere along the way I confused that silence for strength. But the truth is, silence has layers. There's the silence of knowing your opinion won't be heard, so you keep it to yourself. There's the silence after a text that never gets answered. There's the silence in a room full of people who talk around you, but never to you. And then there's the silence that creeps in when your pain becomes too familiar, too quiet, too expected, for even you to notice anymore. That's the silence I was living in. The night after I visited the lake house, I lay awake for hours. My phone screen was black, no missed calls, no apology, no explanation. Nothing from my mom, nothing from Lana. It was like I never came, like I hadn't stepped into the aftermath of their celebration and walked through a home that reeked of carelessness and wine. I started replaying old memories, ones I hadn't thought about in years. Like the time I got accepted into my first-choice college, and Dad just nodded while Lana announced she'd dropped out of her photography course and everyone rushed to comfort her. Or the night I drove home in the rain after working a 14-hour shift, only to find out my family had all gone to dinner to celebrate Lana's big decision to start over. I wasn't invited. Again. Every moment stacked on top of the next, like bricks in a wall I hadn't realized I was trapped behind. That wall was built with every small dismissal, every overlooked birthday, every time I was expected to understand while no one tried to understand me. And for years, I let them. Because I thought love meant patience. I thought family meant unconditional. I thought being good meant being quiet. But that night I understood something different, something harder, something heavier. Silence wasn't peace. Silence was erasure. And I had been erasing myself from my own life just to stay palatable to people who barely saw me. I sat up in bed, turned on the light, and looked around my apartment. It was quiet. But it was mine. Every picture frame, every throw pillow, every plant on the windowsill, I chose them. No one ignored me here. No one diminished me here. There was no voice over mine, no laughter that cut me out, no spotlight I had to fight for. Just me, my breath, my truth. And maybe, just maybe, that was the first real kind of peace I'd ever known. There's a kind of exhaustion that doesn't come from work. It's not the kind of tired you fix with a nap or a vacation or even a long weekend away. It's the kind that settles into your bones after years of giving without ever being seen. A weariness that creeps into your smile, your posture, your voice. It makes your body go through the motions even as your spirit quietly folds itself inward. That's what I was feeling. And the worst part? I didn't even know how long it had been there. I sat at my desk that Monday morning, answering emails with robotic precision. The screen blurred in front of me. Not because I was tired, but because something inside me was shifting, breaking, or maybe finally waking up. I opened a folder on my computer labeled House Expenses. It was one of many I kept obsessively organized: contracts, invoices, design plans, material lists. I clicked through the documents, each one stamped with dates, signatures, proof. The numbers were staggering. Over 2 years, I'd spent nearly $134,000 on that house, not including the time I'd driven out on weekends to meet contractors, troubleshoot issues, clean up after storms. Every nail, every tile, every window had passed through my hands in some way, and not once had anyone asked me, "Are you okay doing this alone?" Not when I offered to pay for the plumbing upgrade. Not when I added the screen porch because Mom mentioned her allergies. Not when I stayed up late researching water filtration systems after Lana said she wanted to go off-grid chic during summer visits. They just accepted it. Like it was mine to give. Like I was built to carry it all. The problem with being dependable is that people start to depend on you and then forget to appreciate you. Worse, they forget you have limits. I thought back to a voicemail I got from my mom a few months prior. Her tone was soft, almost airy. "Julia, honey, do you think you could cover the roof repair this month? Lana's card is maxed out again, and I know you always come through." I had wired the money the same day. No questions asked. No thank you either. That voicemail wasn't unusual. In fact, I had a whole archive of them, each one a quiet reminder that my value to them was tied to what I could give. And I gave. Willingly. Generously. Because I thought that's what love looked like. I was wrong. Love isn't silent. Love doesn't vanish when the favors stop. Love doesn't ask you to shrink while others stretch out and take up the space you carved. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the ceiling, fighting the lump forming in my throat. I had become the family's safety net, their silent investor, the dependable ghost behind every good thing that happened. But ghosts don't get invited to the party, and I was done haunting my own life. It took me 3 full days to work up the courage to text Lana, not because I was afraid of confrontation. I've handled corporate lawsuits, million-dollar project deadlines, and a team of 12 engineers who think sarcasm is a second language. But there's something uniquely paralyzing about family silence. It carries weight. It knows your softest spots. My fingers hovered over the keyboard for a long time. I typed out a dozen versions of the same question before settling on the most direct one. Was I not invited? No exclamation marks, no emojis, no passive-aggressive punctuation. Just 7 words that had sat heavy in my chest since that night outside the lake house. The reply came quickly. "Oh, I thought you were busy. Mom said not to bother you." I stared at her message. Cold, clean, convenient. I reread it 4 times, then 5. My stomach churned. This wasn't just about a party. This was about erasure. This was about the quiet, calculated assumption that I wouldn't want to be included in something I built from the ground up. Or worse, that they didn't care whether I did or not. I didn't reply. That same afternoon, my phone rang. It was Mom. I considered not answering, letting it ring out. But some part of me, the part that still wanted answers, or maybe just the sound of her voice owning something, hit accept. Her tone was light, casual, like nothing had happened. "Sweetheart, just calling to check in. How's work?" I didn't answer right away. I let the silence stretch, just enough for her to feel the weight of it. "You know," I finally said, "I saw the photos." There was a pause, a small, sharp inhale on the other end. "Oh, those. It was just something simple. Lana needed a little joy and the house was sitting empty. I didn't think you'd mind. Didn't think I'd mind. A party in the home I designed. Decorations nailed into the walls I sealed myself. People trampling through the rooms I paid for, laughing, eating, celebrating, all without me." "I mind," I said quietly. She sighed. That performative kind of sigh. The one meant to make me feel like I was overreacting. "Julia, you take things so personally, it's exhausting, you're always so intense." There it was, that old script. The one where Lana is spontaneous and fun and I'm serious and dramatic. The one where my boundaries are problems and my hurt is an inconvenience. "I'm not intense," I said. "I'm tired." She chuckled, but it wasn't kind. "You're always tired. Maybe you should take a break from work. Do something fun." "Like being excluded from your own family," I almost said. Instead, I let the silence hang again. "Mom," I said, more firmly this time, "I'm not calling for permission to feel something. I just wanted to make sure you knew." She didn't respond, and neither did I. I hung up before the silence turned into more excuses. That evening, as I stood at the kitchen counter reheating leftovers, my phone buzzed again. A new message from Lana. "Mom says you're upset. Don't take everything so hard. It wasn't that deep." I stared at the screen, then turned it face down. It wasn't that deep. That phrase sat with me the rest of the night like a stone in my gut. As if the house, the time, the money, the memory of being locked out of my own gift, it was just surface level. As if caring deeply made me weak. But I wasn't weak. I was finally done pretending their indifference was okay. And something in me was starting to shift from silence to voice, from tolerance to truth. I hadn't been to my mother's apartment in almost a year. It was a modest place in the middle of the city. Small, neat, filled with ceramic angels and framed photos that hadn't been updated since Lana's high school graduation. I used to visit every few weeks, drop off groceries, help her sort mail, replace light bulbs. She always thanked me, then always forgot I was there. But this time was different. I wasn't there to fix anything. I was there to be heard. When she opened the door, she looked surprised to see me. "Julia," she said slowly, like the name tasted unfamiliar. "I wasn't expecting—" "I know," I said, walking past her into the living room. I sat down on the edge of the couch. She followed behind me cautiously, like she could sense the tension in the air but wasn't sure where it was coming from. Or maybe she knew exactly where and just didn't want to deal with it. She sat across from me, folded her hands in her lap, and waited. I looked around. Same couch, same yellowed curtains, same dusty scent of lavender potpourri that had clung to every holiday memory in my childhood. "Mom," I began, "this isn't going to be a long conversation." She gave me that tight-lipped smile I knew too well. The one that meant, let's not make this uncomfortable. I made it uncomfortable anyway. What happened at the lake house wasn't just inconsiderate. It was cruel. Her fingers tightened around each other. "Julia, you weren't left out on purpose. You're always busy. I didn't want to bother you." "That excuse doesn't work anymore," I said. "You didn't bother to ask. You didn't check. You made a choice. And so did Lana." She looked away, like the window suddenly needed her attention. I leaned forward. "I built that house for you, for both of you. Not for it to become some backdrop for parties I'm not invited to." "You're making it bigger than it was," she said softly. "No, I'm finally making it as big as it is." She blinked at me, stunned into silence. "I don't need an apology," I said. "But I need you to know this isn't going to keep happening. I'm done being the dependable background character in this family." Her eyes narrowed slightly. "So what? You're cutting us off?" "No," I said calmly. "I'm setting boundaries. There's a difference." She laughed once, quietly, like she didn't believe me, like I was playing a role I'd abandoned the moment she needed something again. "Look," she said, "you've always been intense, Julia. Serious, we know you love us, but you don't make it easy sometimes." I stood up. You think love is supposed to be easy? I've been paying for easy my entire life. I gave without asking, showed up without question, covered for Lana, covered for you. That wasn't love to you?" Her voice cracked just a little. "It's not about love, it's about tone. It's how you say things. You make everything sound like a transaction." "No?" I said. "You did." I reached into my bag and pulled out an envelope, an itemized list of the repairs and upgrades I'd made to the lake house over the past year. HVAC system, new flooring, landscaping, the custom porch swing, every last item, with dates and receipts. I placed it on the coffee table between us. "What's this?" she asked. "It's a boundary," I replied, "and a bill." She didn't touch it. I didn't need her to. I turned to leave. "You always said I was difficult," I added over my shoulder. "But maybe I was just done being easy?" Then I walked out, the door clicking shut behind me like a period at the end of a sentence I should have said years ago. I didn't expect anyone to read the envelope. I knew my mother, I knew Lana. Neither of them liked numbers, especially when those numbers came with weight, with meaning, with accountability. Emotions they could dismiss. But facts were stubborn, and this time I was done speaking in feelings. That night I went home and did something I'd never done before. I itemized the entire history of the lake house. Not just the bills, though those alone were enough to make someone choke. I pulled up every bank transfer, every Venmo payment to vendors, every Home Depot receipt I'd thrown into a drawer. The composite roof shingles, the HVAC overhaul, the surprise mold remediation when the kitchen wall tested positive. The late-night drive I made in the middle of winter to restart the frozen pipes after Lana forgot to turn off the outside water line. It wasn't just money, it was time, gas, missed birthdays, canceled dates, stress I didn't show because I thought love meant shouldering things quietly. It was sacrifice, but sacrifice is a word people romanticize. What they don't tell you is that when you sacrifice long enough, people forget you ever had limits. I printed everything, made copies, bound them neatly into a slim folder with my name and the property address on the cover like it was a damn portfolio. The next morning I emailed Lana. Subject: Use of property body. I'm formalizing access guidelines for the lake house going forward. Please find attached a breakdown of costs to date. If you and Mom would like to continue using the property, I'm requesting proportional financial participation. Let me know if you'd like to discuss. No emotion, no apology, no explanation. I was done trying to sound soft. 15 minutes later, Lana replied, "This is so like you. Controlling, cold. Do you seriously expect us to pay you like tenants? It was a gift, Julia." I read it once, then again. She didn't even deny the use. She denied my right to ask for respect. I didn't respond right away. Instead, I called a real estate attorney just to ask some questions, just to know my rights. I also changed the locks on the front gate, not out of spite, but because for once I wanted control of something I built. 3 days passed, then 4. On the 5th day, a text from Lana popped up. Transferred $2,800. Hope that makes you feel better. No greeting, no context, no acknowledgement of anything beyond the dollar sign. It felt like someone tossing a coin into a well. Not a gesture of goodwill, just a transaction. Just proof that in the end I was still being treated like the help. But here's the thing. Even though the message stung, even though it was as void of emotion as I'd expected, it still marked a shift. For the first time in our entire relationship, Lana had to pay attention to what something cost her. Not just in money, in discomfort, in ego, in access. And for once, I didn't try to soothe the sting for her. I didn't respond. Instead, I made a cup of tea, sat by the window, watched the rain paint streaks on the glass while Rusty snored softly at my feet. I had enforced a line. It didn't come with applause, but it came with clarity. And for the first time in my life, I was beginning to understand that clarity was worth more than closeness. Especially when closeness was built on conditions. Boundaries don't always make noise. Sometimes they arrive in silence, like a door quietly locking from the inside. A phone set face down, an email not replied to, a conversation left to wither in its own indifference. When Lana transferred the money, $2,800 exactly, she didn't call, didn't write, didn't ask any questions. It wasn't a conversation, it was compliance, a transaction, a way to shut me up without actually engaging. And yet, in its coldness, it spoke volumes. It told me she heard me. Maybe not in the way I'd hoped, but she heard me. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. Because for the first time, I wasn't waiting for her to validate how I felt. I wasn't craving a thank you or chasing a breadcrumb of acknowledgement. I wasn't hoping for anything. I was watching, observing, holding my line without apology. That morning, I drove out to the lake house again. It had rained the night before, and the gravel road was slick, speckled with tiny puddles. The trees flanked either side like sentinels, quiet and ancient. I rolled the window down slightly, just enough to let the forest air slip in. It smelled like cedar and earth, a little like healing. When I pulled up to the house, the gate stood closed, locked. The new keypad blinked silently. Only I knew the code now. As I stepped out of the car, I noticed the porch light was still on, a soft, golden glow against the gray of the day. It flickered slightly, like it wasn't sure it should still be shining. Inside, the space was still. No leftover wine glasses, no rumpled blankets, no perfume lingering in the air. Just wood and silence. My kind of silence. I moved through each room like someone seeing it for the first time. Not as a caretaker, not as a giver, but as an owner. A woman who had created something beautiful and was finally claiming it without shame. I paused at the bookshelf in the corner of the living room. Lana had once placed a cheap, framed quote there, something about home being where the laughter is. It was gone now, probably taken back in a quiet act of defiance. I replaced it with a small ceramic bowl I'd bought years ago at a roadside artist's stall. It was imperfect. The glaze cracked slightly, but it was mine, and it belonged here. In this house I had bled into, cried over, built with a vision they never understood. Not because I needed them to, but because I thought somehow giving enough would earn me belonging. I know better now. You can't build your way into people's hearts. You can't buy your seat at a table that was never meant to be set for you. What you can do, what I was finally learning to do, is build your own table, your own house, your own rules, and sit at them alone, if you must, with peace as your company. That day, I didn't stay long. I checked the windows, walked the perimeter, set the new security system. Before I left, I stood by the big picture window overlooking the lake. The clouds had started to part, and a narrow shaft of sunlight cut through, hitting the water just right. It glowed. I stood there for a long moment, not grieving, not raging, just being. And it felt enough. When I closed the door behind me, it didn't feel like a retreat. It felt like a quiet declaration. This house had a name now, and it wasn't theirs. It was mine. There's something underrated about a door quietly clicking shut, not slammed, not locked in anger, just closed, firm, final, certain. That's how it felt the morning I left the lake house. I didn't storm out, I didn't make a speech. I didn't even glance back to see if someone would come chasing after me, because I already knew no one would. And that somehow no longer felt tragic. It just felt true. For most of my life, I thought drawing a boundary required conflict, that I had to explain, justify, offer footnotes of emotional context just to prove I wasn't being cruel. But what I've come to understand is this. Boundaries don't require drama. They don't even need to be loud. They just need to be real and respected. That week, I didn't call anyone. No follow-up texts, no check-ins, no invitations to discuss what all this really meant. I stopped needing them to understand. That was the real shift. See, for years I'd been performing in hopes that someone would clap. I kept showing up to a theater where the lights were off, the seats were empty, and the only echo was my own voice asking, "Do you see me yet?" They didn't. And I'm not angry about that anymore. I'm just done rehearsing for an audience that left a long time ago. That Friday night I stayed in. I ordered Indian takeout, lit a candle that smelled like cardamom and pine, and pulled out a journal I hadn't touched in months. Rusty curled up beside me, one paw over his nose, his whole body curled like a comma between thoughts. I wrote a single sentence on the page. I do not owe softness where I've received silence. Then I underlined it. Twice. That was it. No manifesto. No letter to Mom. No imagined conversation with Lana. Just a quiet acknowledgement that I was no longer shrinking myself to fit inside the spaces they allowed. The next morning I got a text from my father. We hadn't spoken in months. Your mother told me what happened. She's hurt. Maybe call her? I stared at the message for a long time. There it was again. Her pain as priority. Her discomfort as center stage. Me as the reliable bridge builder, the fixer, the one who smooths everything over. And for a moment that old instinct flared in my chest. The one that whispered, "Just call her. It'll make things easier." But easier for who? Certainly not for me. So I closed the message, didn't reply, didn't explain. And that silence, for once, didn't feel like absence. It felt like power. It felt like peace. Later that day, I changed my voicemail greeting. Not because I expected anyone to call, but because I realized the old message still said, "Leave your message and I'll get back to you as soon as I can." That wasn't true anymore, so I updated it. "Hi, this is Julia. I may not get back to you, and that's okay." Then I smiled. Not out of bitterness, out of freedom. Because sometimes the most revolutionary thing you can do is stop explaining yourself and just live. It started with an email, subject line, "Lunch?" Just one word. No fluff, no explanation. It came from my father. We hadn't seen each other in almost a year. He and Mom had been separated for over a decade, yet somehow neither had managed to move on. They still spoke on birthdays, still exchanged small talk during holidays. It was never hostile, just faded. Like a photograph left too long in the sun, I replied simply, "At the lake house, Saturday at noon." No further instructions. I didn't know what I expected. Maybe no one would show up. Maybe they both would. I didn't rehearse the conversation. I didn't clean the house to perfection. I just wanted to try one more time, but on my terms. Saturday came with overcast skies and cool air off the lake. I set the table for 3, nothing elaborate. Just grilled chicken, roasted vegetables, a salad with citrus dressing I knew my dad liked. I placed water glasses, cloth napkins, and a single white flower in a small jar. Simple, clean, unforced. At 11:56, I heard a car door shut. Dad arrived first. He walked up the stone path slowly, hands in his jacket pockets, eyes scanning the porch like it was his first time seeing it. It wasn't, but he'd only been there once, briefly, when the construction was still unfinished. I remembered him saying, "It's gonna be nice, Jules," before driving off without asking why I was doing all of it alone. He stepped into the house and looked around. "Smells good," he said. I smiled faintly. "Thanks for coming." He nodded, then turned to the window. "You did a hell of a job here." Before I could respond, another car pulled in. It was her. Mom stepped out slowly, carefully, as if she wasn't quite sure she should be here. She wore a pale scarf I'd given her years ago, one I hadn't seen in forever. It gave me pause. She stepped into the entryway and looked around, but her eyes didn't land on me right away. "Still the best view on the lake," she said softly. I didn't correct her. I just gestured to the table. We sat. At first, it was quiet. Forks tapping gently against plates. A few murmurs about the food. Dad asked about my work. Mom commented on the new cushions I'd added to the porch swing. No big confessions, no apologies, but no tension either. And honestly, that felt like a miracle. Halfway through the meal, Mom looked up. Not at the food, not at the lake, at me. "I didn't handle things well," she said, her voice just above a whisper. I set my fork down. "I'm not good at saying thank you," she continued. "I guess I always assumed you'd just understand. You always did." I didn't rush to respond. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is let the silence say what needs to be said. She reached for her water, took a small sip, and added, "But that's not fair to you, and it never was." I looked at her, really looked, and saw something I hadn't seen in a long time. Humility, not guilt, not manipulation. Just a mother finally seeing her daughter as a person, not a function. "Thank you," I said, "for saying that." We didn't hug, we didn't cry, but for the first time, we sat at the same table with nothing between us but truth. And that was enough. After they left, I didn't rush to clear the table. The plate sat with half-eaten greens and lemon rinds. The flour in the jar leaned slightly to one side. The air inside the house still carried traces of roasted garlic and something warmer I couldn't quite name. Maybe it was just the rare weightlessness of a conversation that hadn't turned sharp. I stood at the kitchen sink, rinsing the glasses slowly, watching the sun stretch lower across the lake. Then I saw it. The chair. The one I had placed at the head of the table. It was intentional. A fourth setting. Forks, knife, water glass, napkin folded with care. I had no plans to fill it. And yet there it sat, silent and steady, like a symbol only I could read. It wasn't set for anyone specific. Not Lana, not my parents. It was for the version of me that had waited so long to be welcomed. The one who kept showing up hoping this would be the meal, the holiday, the moment where everything shifted. That chair held her place. I walked over and gently pulled it back from the table, sat down. The view from that spot was different. From there, I could see the whole room, the door I'd opened again even after everything, the window where light spilled across the floor, the faces that had come and gone, and the ones that may never sit here again. And still, that chair stayed. People think an empty seat at the table represents absence, but sometimes it's a boundary, a reminder, a quiet declaration that not everyone deserves access just because they share your blood. I used to believe family meant automatic belonging, that no matter how bruised or broken, you always found your way back to the table. That love, even when warped or uneven, earned you a seat. But that belief kept me coming back to a table where I was served guilt instead of grace. Now I see it differently. A table is sacred. It's where stories are told, where silence is broken, where decisions are made. It's where you learn whether you're being fed or being used. And I was done being consumed. So the chair stayed empty, not out of spite, not as punishment, but as a symbol of choice, of self-respect, of the voice I finally stopped silencing. I stood again, smoothed the napkin one last time, and left the place setting untouched. It didn't matter who noticed it. It mattered that I did. Later that evening, as the sky turned the color of ash and lavender, I lit a candle on the table. No occasion, no audience, just a small flame for myself. I sat quietly, letting the glow warm the side of my face, and whispered, not a prayer, not a wish, just a simple truth. I decide who sits with me. Then I blew it out, and the room didn't feel empty. It felt mine. The next day I found a voicemail from my dad. Hey, Jules, that lunch, it was good. You cooked like your mom used to, before she got too busy to cook, before everything got complicated. There was a pause. I hope we can do it again sometime. I listened to it twice, not because the words were profound, but because of what they weren't. There was no awkward apology, no forced attempt to fix things, just a simple acknowledgement that something felt different. And maybe, just maybe, better. Later that week, I got an unexpected text from Mom. I found that old photo. You, me, Lana on the back porch in that red folding chair. You were holding a book almost bigger than you. God, you were always reading. I didn't know how to respond, so I didn't, not right away. But I sat with it, because it didn't feel like an olive branch. It felt like a breadcrumb, like maybe she was trying to find her way back. I didn't need her to. I wasn't waiting anymore. But I wasn't closed off either. The strange thing about healing is that it doesn't always come with trumpets and clear signs. Sometimes it comes as a softer tone in a parent's voice, or a text that doesn't demand, just shares. It comes in the way people show up differently, quietly, at their own pace. A few weekends later, I was back at the lake house, reading on the porch swing, when I heard a car pull into the drive. I looked up, expecting maybe a neighbor or a delivery, but it was my father. He held up 2 cups of coffee. No cream, 1 sugar, he said. He remembered. We didn't talk about the past. We didn't talk about Mom. We didn't talk about Lana. We talked about nothing and everything. The trees, the house, the porch rail I needed to restain. It was the most ease I'd felt with him since I was 16. As he left, he stood by the car and said, You know, I don't think I ever told you how proud I am of you. Not just for the job. For all of it. For standing up. I nodded. You didn't have to, I said. But thank you. He smiled and drove off. No fanfare, but the warmth stayed. That night I sat by the window as the sky folded into dusk. I poured myself a glass of wine, not to toast anything, but just to mark the stillness. Things weren't fixed, but they were no longer frozen, and sometimes that's enough. You learn to meet people where they're willing to go, without dragging yourself back to where you no longer belong. That's what the healing looked like now. Not dramatic, not explosive, just gradual, soft, like a fire that doesn't roar, but still keeps you warm. Forgiveness is a word people love to throw around. Just forgive her. You'll feel lighter if you let it go. Family is family. But here's what no one tells you. You don't have to forgive someone to find peace. You don't have to force closure that was never offered. You don't have to sit across from someone who hurt you and pretend that the past doesn't still echo. Sometimes peace isn't a reunion, it's a release. It had been 3 weeks since that quiet lunch at the lake house, since my mother said in the smallest way possible that she saw me. Since my father offered a coffee and a sentence I'd waited 20 years to hear, and I hadn't spoken to Lana since the transfer. No apology, no call. Just silence. A silence that this time I didn't chase or try to break. I wasn't angry anymore, not in the way I used to be. I didn't rehearse speeches in the shower or craft perfect comebacks in my head. I didn't feel the urge to make her see, to force her to understand the weight of what she'd done or failed to do, because somewhere in the stillness I'd realized something I never allowed myself to consider before. I didn't need her to get it. I didn't need her to heal. Lana would always live in a world where charm opened doors and consequences arrived softly, if at all. She'd always assume I'd be there to clean up the mess or absorb the insult because that's how it had always been. But not anymore. I no longer needed her validation, or her apology, or her presence. That was the freedom I never knew I could choose. One quiet Sunday afternoon, I walked through the house with a donation box in my arms. Little things Lana had left over the years. A pair of flip-flops, a beach towel, a mug that said good vibes only. I didn't burn them, I didn't throw them out in anger, I just let them go. And with every item I packed, I felt a little lighter. This wasn't revenge, this was redefinition. The lake house no longer had to carry the weight of disappointment or unmet expectations. It didn't have to be a battleground for invisible wars or a trophy I silently handed over in exchange for scraps of affection. It could just be mine. A space where I could breathe, alone or with people who didn't need to be convinced to treat me like I mattered. As I stood by the door, ready to take the box to the local thrift store, I looked around one last time. Not to mourn, to mark the end of a chapter. I whispered, not to anyone in particular, I forgive myself for staying too long. Then I stepped outside. The sun was low, the sky painted in gold and ash and soft pink. The wind moved through the trees like a quiet applause, and I didn't feel abandoned. I felt sovereign. I wasn't waiting for an apology anymore, because I had already given myself permission to move on. Sometimes the people who save you aren't the ones who share your last name. They're the ones who remember your laugh from college, the ones who text out of the blue when your silence feels loud, the ones who don't need backstory. They were there when the story started. For me, that person was Tessa. We met freshman year in a computer science class neither of us wanted to take. She was loud, sarcastic, and refused to believe that curly braces mattered in code syntax. I was the quiet one with color-coded notes and anxiety about our first midterm. Somehow our differences turned into friendship. She taught me to let go. I taught her how to pass data structures. Over the years, life took us in different directions. She moved to Boston, I stayed in Portland. We texted on birthdays and exchanged holiday cards that usually arrived 2 weeks late. We always said, let's catch up soon, and never did. Until now. That Tuesday night I called her. No warning, no polite text asking if she had time. I just called. She picked up on the second ring. Well, damn, is this my long-lost lake house heiress? I laughed, not politely, not performatively. A real belly-deep laugh I hadn't felt in months. You always know how to ruin a dramatic moment, I said. It's a gift, she replied. So, who finally pushed you off the edge? Take a guess, I said. She didn't need to. She already knew. We talked for 2 hours. No filters, no edits, just unspooling the mess of it all. My mother, Lana, the party, the money, the silence that followed. I told her everything. And she didn't interrupt to fix it. She didn't say, but she's your sister, or maybe they didn't mean it. She just listened. And then at the end, she said something I'll never forget. Julia, she said slowly, you've always been the one who keeps the lights on. You show up, you build the house, you light the candles, you make sure everyone has a seat. But somewhere along the way, they started acting like you were the power source too, like you'd never run out, like you owed them the glow. I sat with that. You're not a lighthouse, she added. You're a person. You get to rest. You get to be seen. You don't have to burn just so they can find their way. The line went quiet for a second. Then I whispered, but if I stop burning, who will I be? And her answer? Free. There's something about hearing your truth reflected back by someone who's loved you through every version of yourself, someone who saw you before you had to explain yourself to the world, who remembers the light in your eyes before you learned to dim it for everyone else's comfort. Tessa reminded me of who I was before the silence, before I wrapped my identity in usefulness, before I equated love with labor. She reminded me that I wasn't crazy, I wasn't cruel, I wasn't too much, I was just tired. That night, after we hung up, I sat on the porch swing with Rusty at my feet. The lake was still. The stars came out slowly, one by one, like they were shy about being seen. I wrapped a blanket around my shoulders and let the words echo inside me. You're not a lighthouse. You don't have to burn just to be worthy. And for the first time, I believed it. There's a tree on the edge of the property. A massive oak, older than the house, older than any of us. Its roots twist deep into the soil, gnarled and unmoved. Storms have come and gone, yet it stands season after season, like it knows something the rest of us are still figuring out. I started sitting under that tree in the early mornings. No phone, no journal, just me and the sound of wind moving through branches, the rustle of leaves, the steady rhythm of water against the shore. It became my sanctuary, a place where I could just be, not someone's daughter, not someone's sister, not the fixer or the provider, just a woman, breathing. One morning, I brought my coffee and an old book I hadn't touched in years. The spine cracked when I opened it, pages slightly yellowed, the kind of wear that comes from being loved once, then forgotten. Kind of like me. I didn't even read much. I just liked the weight of it in my hands. A reminder that stories could be held, that words mattered, that something could age and still be valuable. The wind picked up. It wasn't harsh, just enough to lift a few strands of hair from my face and tug at the hem of my sweater. The oak creaked gently, like it was sighing, or speaking. I leaned back against its wide trunk and let myself exhale. For the first time in a long while, I wasn't bracing for impact. I wasn't mentally preparing a response. I wasn't rehearsing a justification. I was still. And it was strange how much courage it took to stop anticipating disappointment, to stop waiting for the next request, the next dismissal, the next subtle reminder that I was useful, but never quite lovable. That oak didn't ask anything of me. It didn't need me to show up a certain way. It didn't care if I'd been quiet or too loud or too emotional or too distant. It just let me lean. That morning I realized something simple and profound. I had spent my entire life bending, shrinking myself to fit into other people's comfort zones, contorting to meet expectations no one ever said out loud but always enforced, holding my breath to keep the peace, smiling through being overlooked, giving more when they gave less. But the oak didn't bend. It had weathered decades of wind and ice and rain and still stood firm. And maybe that's what I was learning to be. Not hard, not cold, just rooted, strong in my own way, flexible where I chose to be, immovable where it counted. I ran my hand over the bark, rough and grooved like a road map, every mark earned, every scar a story, and I whispered, not to the tree, but to myself, "You've made it through worse." Because I had, because I was still here, because not being invited didn't mean I didn't belong, because I was done tying my worth to the size of my sacrifices. I closed the book, stood slowly and looked out across the lake. The sun was higher now, casting light across the water like scattered glass. A soft breeze carried the scent of pine and damp earth. I felt it in my bones. A shift, a quiet strength waking up. That day I didn't return to my laptop or my inbox or the never-ending to-do list. I stayed by the tree. Let the hours pass without apology. Let the silence hold me without asking me to earn it. Because healing isn't always loud. Sometimes it's just the decision to stay rooted, to choose stillness, to finally stop explaining why you deserve to take up space. It's strange how quiet the world gets when you stop performing. Not the kind of quiet that comes with loneliness, but the kind that feels like clarity. Like walking out of a crowded room and realizing you've been shouting just to be heard. I wasn't shouting anymore. I had spent years trying to earn love with usefulness, thinking that if I showed up enough, paid enough, stayed quiet enough, eventually someone would say, "We see you." But all I ever did was disappear. And that wasn't love. That was survival. Now I was writing a different ending. Not the dramatic kind where doors slam and phone numbers are blocked and family dinners erupt into screaming matches. That's not how this story ends. This story ends with a woman finally choosing herself. It ends with still mornings and deep breaths and quiet boundaries that don't need to be explained. It ends with presence and peace. I remember the day it hit me fully. I was sitting at the lake house, curled into the corner of the porch swing, watching the wind stir ripples across the water. The sun was just beginning to dip behind the trees, casting everything in amber. I had my phone in my lap, unlocked, screen dark. I hadn't checked it in over an hour. That used to be unthinkable. I was always scanning, always anticipating, waiting for a crisis to manage or a silence to interpret. My body was trained to be ready, to fix, to absorb, to rescue. But that evening there was nothing to fix. No one was asking anything of me. No one needed me to be anything other than still. And I let myself feel it. The freedom, the quiet, the weight of finally stepping out of a role I never agreed to play. I thought of Lana. I hadn't heard from her in weeks, not since the money transfer. There was no apology, no explanation, no second attempt to connect. And I was okay with that. Because this time, the silence wasn't mine to solve. I thought of my mother, of her voice at that lunch, softer, tentative, not quite ready to give me everything I needed, but maybe starting to understand that I'd stopped asking. That was enough. Not because it fixed anything, but because I wasn't waiting anymore. Sometimes we grow up thinking we need closure to move on. We wait for the perfect apology, the right words, the moment they finally get it. But healing doesn't always need a witness. Sometimes it just needs a decision. I stood up, walked inside, and poured a glass of water. On the kitchen table sat the folder I'd once handed my mother, the list of expenses, the invoice for years of invisible labor. I hadn't thrown it out yet, but I wasn't holding on to it either. It was just there. A part of the past I no longer needed to carry. I picked it up, slipped it into a drawer, closed it quietly. Not erased, just closed. Later that night, I sat by the window with Rusty curled beside me and opened a blank page on my laptop. I didn't know if I was writing a letter, an essay, or just thoughts I needed to let go of, but the words came easily. No one gets to rewrite my role in this story, not even the people I love most. I read it back, then typed it again. No one gets to rewrite my role in this story, because I know who I am now. I'm not the dependable daughter, not the fixer, not the one who keeps the family glued together while quietly falling apart. I'm not the background. I'm the narrator. I get to choose the ending. And finally, I choose me. The funny thing about starting over is that it rarely looks like a big moment. There's no music swelling in the background, no dramatic haircut, no grand announcement, just small, quiet changes that stack up until one day you realize you feel different. Lighter, more honest, more you. That shift started showing up in the everyday things. I started cooking again, not for guests, not to impress anyone, just for me. Fresh herbs, roasted vegetables, homemade bread that sometimes collapsed in the middle, but smelled like warmth. I redecorated the guest room, took down the framed quote Lana left years ago and replaced it with a canvas I painted myself. It wasn't perfect, but it was mine. Bright blues and burnt oranges, a little chaotic, a little free. Rusty and I took morning walks. We stopped rushing. We paused at the overlook and watched the herons land on the far side of the lake. I started to learn their rhythms, when they fed, when they rested, how they lifted off with no effort at all. It became a kind of prayer, a reminder that flight doesn't have to be frantic. I even started sleeping through the night again. No midnight pacing, no phone by the pillow, no rehearsed conversations that would never happen. Just sleep. That deep, dreamless kind that only comes when your nervous system finally believes it's safe. Friends started noticing. "You sound different," they'd say. "You look lighter." And I did. Not because life was perfect, but because I'd finally stepped out of the performance. I'd let go of the version of me who had to earn everything, who had to prove her worth with overgiving. Now I was showing up for myself, without guilt, without apology. It didn't mean the past didn't matter. I didn't erase it. I still thought of my mother, of Lana. Sometimes I missed them, sometimes I didn't. Both feelings were allowed now. I wasn't trying to be unbothered, I was trying to be real, and real, I've learned, is enough. For a long time I thought love had to hurt. I thought it meant giving until you were empty, forgiving before the apology, making room, even when you were the one pushed out. That's what I saw growing up. My mother loved in service. My father loved in distance. Lana loved loudly, but conditionally. I never blamed them for it. I just didn't question it. I believed family meant sacrifice, and the more you gave, the more you proved your place. But what no one told me is that real love doesn't need proof. It doesn't need performance. Real love lets you breathe. It doesn't shame you for having needs or draw lines around who deserves comfort and who doesn't. It doesn't ask you to twist yourself into something easier to digest. So I started redefining it. Not in some big manifesto, but in daily choices. I said no without guilt. I asked for space without apology. I let go of relationships that only called when they needed something. And I opened up to ones that felt quiet, steady, real. There was a neighbor down the road, a retired teacher named Carol. She started bringing me lemons from her backyard tree. No explanation, no expectations, just a small kindness placed gently on my porch every Sunday. That became love. There was a local bookstore owner who remembered my name and always set aside new memoirs he thought I'd like. He never asked about my job or my past. That, too, was love. Tessa called every week now. Sometimes we barely talked. Sometimes we vented about nothing at all. There were no obligations between us. Just two women who showed up without performance. That was the kind of love I never knew I needed. And slowly I stopped measuring family by DNA. I started measuring it by presence, by kindness, by the feeling of being seen when you're not trying so hard to be visible. That shift didn't make everything easy. I still felt grief sometimes, for the relationship I wanted with my mother, for the sisterhood I thought I'd have, for the version of me that worked so hard to be loved in all the wrong ways. But even grief can be sacred when it's honest. Now, when I think about family, I think about safety, about trust, about reciprocity. And sometimes, I think about a table, not full of people out of obligation, but full of people who show up because they want to. That's the kind of family I'm building now. No roles to play, no loyalty tests, just truth. And peace. There's power in choosing yourself. Not because you're perfect. Not because you're fearless. But because you finally understand this one truth: you are not required to stay where you are unseen. That lake house still stands. The wind still moves through the trees. The sun still sets across the water. But it's no longer a monument to sacrifice. It's no longer a symbol of unreturned love. It's mine. Because I claimed it, not just in title or deed, but in meaning, in presence, in how I choose to fill it now, with people who respect my boundaries, with quiet mornings that don't demand anything from me, with love that doesn't arrive attached to conditions. This journey hasn't been about cutting people out. It's been about cutting away the expectations that kept me small. It's about rewriting the rules of family, identity, and worth. And maybe, just maybe, it's also about reminding someone, you, that you're allowed to do the same. You don't have to prove you're good by being quiet. You don't have to earn your place by enduring what hurts. You don't have to stay loyal to a story that leaves you empty. So if you're sitting in silence, waiting for someone to notice your worth, this is your sign. Notice it yourself. Reclaim it. Live it out loud. And if this story spoke to something inside you, I invite you to share it. With a friend. With someone who needs to hear that they're not alone. Leave a comment. Tell me where you are in your own journey. And if you want more stories like this, real, raw, healing, subscribe. Because here we don't just talk about pain, we talk about power, and we walk toward freedom, together.